So you want to build a trebuchet. Now trebuchets, they may be a little difficult to build, but they use simple materials and they're extremely fun, especially for launching bad Halloween candy, which you're about to get in law. So before we begin building the trebuchet, let me go ahead and explain to you the different parts of a trebuchet so that you'll know what I'm talking about when I'm lobbing out these terms you may not understand. So first, the first in order of importance is the arm. Now this arm here, there's what's called the sling arm. Now the sling arm refers to the entire length of the arm. Okay, that's the sling arm. Now, for most of this video, I will divide it into two parts and refer to them like this. So from here, right here is the axle. So I'll turn it so you can see. You can see this dowel. It twists on the axle. Okay, so that is the axle or the fulcrum. Now everything between the fulcrum and the end, this part here, that is called the payload arm. Now the payload is important to understand. Payload is the thing that you are shooting or launching. So in this case, the payload would be the candy. Okay. Next, we have our counterweight arm. Our counterweight arm is everything from the axle or the fulcrum to the end. This is the heavy end, because hanging off it, as you can see, is a tin can, and if I tilt it, you can see there's all sorts of fishing weights in here, just lead to make it real heavy. Although I wouldn't recommend playing with lead. Try to find steel or pennies or something. Okay, but those two, the counterweight arm and the payload arm, together make up the sling arm. Okay, so next we have the sling. Now the sling attaches to a pin right here. Well, it's permanently fixed on this loop up here, but then you have a loop in the string that you attach right here to the pin, and then you put the candy in, just like this. So you hold it in, and this portion, including the string and the little pouch here at the end, that's known as the sling. Okay, everything else, this is just the frame. Sometimes I'll refer to this as the supports and the base or the columns. It just depends. Just try to read between the lines when I'm explaining this video, but pretty self-explanatory. So we got the frame, we got the axis or the fulcrum, we got the sling arm, the sling. Oh, and there's one more thing, the trigger. Now I don't go into much detail about the trigger. You're gonna have to design your own. But what it is, so if you notice that when I pull this down, all I do is I've got this little, it's just a dowel, and it's just a piece of paint stirring stick that's trimmed, and it just fits right over that pin and holds it in place. And I have a string attached to it so that I pull the string and it pulls it out of the way. Okay, so that is the trigger. And those are the important parts of the trebuchet. In order to make a trebuchet, you are going to need the following materials. First, a plank of wood like this. Next, you will need a few paint stirring sticks. You can get these at the local hardware store for pretty cheap. I bought a bundle of 10 for like $1 or $1.50 or something pretty cheap, just like that. Next, you will need some leather. Now this leather is for the sling part of it. And also some string. It should be fairly strong string, probably a little thicker and sturdier than kite string. You will also need a dowel. This one I think is 1/4 inch or maybe 3/8 of an inch diameter. And also a large paint stirring stick. This one's maybe 18-20 inches long. I also got this at the hardware store. It came in a pack of 3 right next to the smaller ones, or some larger piece of long piece of wood. This will serve as the arm, and also I have just a couple random pieces, just a couple random blocks of wood. These aren't necessary, but I'll show you later how they can help stabilize the arm on the axis. And you will need a nail. And if you've got one that's like a finishing nail that doesn't have like this wide head on it, that's great. Otherwise, you can have a regular nail. Just know that we're going to have to cut the top off. And I have a little eye hook. Now you can get away with using a screw or even a staple, but if you've got it, these little tiny eye hooks work awesome. And a little tin cup, a little tin can. This one came from the tomato paste that you get in the grocery store, so I just saved it when we were cooking spaghetti, yum yum spaghetti, and washed it up and made sure there were no sharp edges on it. Okay, so those are the materials that you will need to build a trebuchet. Now, in addition to the materials, you will need several tools that will help you that are pretty important. Number one is glue. Now you can use wood glue. I have some wood glue here. I would recommend using wood glue, but it takes a few hours to cure. So you can also use hot glue, which I'll be using because it's fast, but it's not as sturdy as hot glue or as wood glue, and it can come undone. But because I'm doing this on film and I want you to see the whole process, I'll be using hot glue. Okay. Also, you will need a pair of pliers. Just needle nose pliers will work great. Some scissors for cutting string and fabric. Sandpaper so that you can sand off the calluses on your toes. Just kidding. So you can smooth down the edges where you may need to cut the wood. And a little, just a little saw. You can just see this with fine teeth. You're just going to be cutting the paint stirring sticks. So nothing crazy. You could also use like a hacksaw. And well, two more things. Tape measure or a ruler. Ruler's probably good enough for this, but if you've got a tape measure, awesome possum. Next, and finally, a drill with various drill bit sizes. Specifically a drill bit size that's slightly larger than your dowel. Okay? Now remember, kids, if you are a kid, you ask for help when using the drill. And I'll show you some tips on how to be safe when operating a drill. All right, now that you've collected these materials, let's get started. So the first step in building a trebuchet is to build the frame. Now the frame consists of the base, which is the part that sits on the ground, which will be my plank of wood here. It will have a couple of supports like this, or beams that will go up and down that will eventually hold the axis. So we need to attach these two paint stirring sticks to our base. Okay, I'm going to use a Sharpie. So I'm going to mark 5.5 inches on my board. From the end, just like that. Okay, I'm going to repeat for the other side. 5.5 inches. This is so that I know that my supports are in the same location. Now that I have my marks, it's time to glue the sticks or these arm supports to the base. So I'm going to add the glue, and I had to pause my video because my glue gun died. It's a good thing I got a bunch of them. Okay, so now I'm going to hold it up to here, and I want to make sure that it's as straight up and down as possible. So I hold it here for a second, or a few seconds while it cools. Now we'll add the other side. All right, now I have my two support pillars. Now, by themselves, they're pretty wobbly, and I don't feel that they will hold the weight of the counterweight and the arm and the payload and all that stuff. So I want to reinforce them in a way that will keep them from moving around. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take some of these paint sticks, just like this, and glue them in place like this so that they will be strong. Okay. Now I will add one on this side, and in fact I might trim it. I'm going to trim it, so I'm going to make a little mark, and I'm going to trim it about here. Oh, I forgot I'm using my pencil. My pencil don't mark. Okay, so if I put this here, I want it about that long. Okay. Okay, so I've got my cut, and it wasn't the best cut in the world, but that's okay, because it doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, I'm just sanding that off so it's a much nicer edge. And now I am going to glue it into place. There you have it. Now, this side is much sturdier. It still moves kind of back and forward this way, but I'm not too worried. It's pretty solid as it is. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat with the other side. And now we have cheese. We have our frame. Okay, so the next part of our trebuchet is to add the axle or the fulcrum that the arm will rotate around. So I'm going to get a spare piece of wood. I just have a 2x4. This is my drilling block. So what I'm going to do is, I've already found the drill bit. Let's see, where's my dowel? I already found the drill bit that most closely matches. It's slightly bigger than my dowel. So I'm going to make a hole in the top of this beam. Just like that. Okay? Now, it kind of jumped off center because of the grains of the wood. There's harder spots and softer spots, and this wood is really soft. So what it did is it made the drill bit kind of jump over to the softer wood. So what I want to do is hopefully match where that's at on this opposite side. It needs to be at the same height from the base and off center to match this side. There we go, so that it fits, and let's check it. Awesome. So it looks good up and down, and I'm going to look to the side, and it looks like it's centered just perfectly. Perfect. Okay. Now we have our frame and our axle. Now at some point will probably trim this axle, but for right now, I'm not worried about it. Time to build the arm. Now, this is an important part because this is where mechanical advantage comes into play, because what we're really building is a simple lever, right? So if we put the hole right here where my hand is, and it rotates along this axis, a researcher went through and did some pretty extensive research on the ratios, or basically where to put the hole in the arm. And so he came up with the most optimal place, or the most optimal ratio or size of each arm is 3.75 to 1. So if this section is 1 inch, then this section would be 3.75 inches. Now, this is a lot longer than that. So we're going to have to do some minor calculations to figure out where to put the hole and if we need to trim this. Okay, but before we get to that, we need to figure out if this is going to be long enough and what we need to do. Because there's one other piece of information that you will need, is that the same researcher found that when the arm is cocked, it needs to be at a 45-degree angle. Now, when I say cocked, I mean when it's armed and ready, set, so you just have to push the button or let go and it will launch the payload, right? So it needs to be at a 45-degree angle. Well, I'm going to pull out my dowel for a second because I want to be able to line it up with the dowel. And actually, I'm going to pull out my dowel so that I can use the hole as a guide. Now, we need to figure out exactly when this arm is at 45 degrees. Okay, so I'm gonna move this back and forth. I'm holding it up here at the top and kind of moving it until I find what looks like 45-degree angle. Now you can get, you can measure that, or you can just kind of eyeball it. So I'm not too worried. As long as it's fairly close to 45 degrees, we'll be good. Okay, so once I do that, I am going to trace, because this fulcrum, let me show you a picture. So I'm going to kind of rotate this. All right, you see how I'm holding that? So you want this hole, where my thumb is, to line up to the center of your arm. And then you put the arm at a 45-degree angle. Okay, so that's roughly 45-degree angle. All right, now that I have measured and marked where the hole needs to be, I need to figure out if I need to trim my short arm. Remember, because this needs to be 3.75 times smaller than the long arm, right? So let's measure the big arm, divide it by 3.75, and that'll give us how long this needs to be. Okay, so I measured the length of the arm from where the axis will be to the end. This is called the payload arm. From the middle of the hole, or where the hole will be, to the end, was 14.75 inches. Now, I divided that by the ratio 3.75, and that gave me a little under 4 inches. So now what I need to do is I need to take and trim this piece, this arm at the end here, so that it's 3.93 inches. I'm just going to do it a little less than 4 inches. Okay, so now let's measure. We want to make it 3.9 inches or a little less than 4. So I've got it here, and I'm going to put a mark. And now I am going to trim it. I now have my arm. Now, I want to show you something, because I could just drill the hole right here and place it immediately on my trebuchet. But there's a problem. So I have a pre-drilled one. The hole was as tight as I could get it and still have it move. So I'm going to put it on here and show you what the matter is, what's happening. Okay, see, this is how it eventually will be, and good. It looks like it's at a 45-degree angle, and so So, but my problem is that it wobbles, right? If I look at how bad this wobbles, and it goes from side here. I'll hold this in place. It will move all over the place. That can be bad. Now, it's not going to like hurt anything, although it could cause excessive rubbing and could eventually wear it out quickly and break the actual arm. So I am going to do something to reinforce this. Now that is where these two curious little blocks of wood come into play. So what I'm going to do is I am going to glue them. I'm going to center them over where the hole needs to be, and then I'm going to glue them in place so that it's thicker here. And then I'm going to drill the hole right through, and so it will, I'll show you when I'm done. It'll clean it up, okay? Okay, now I am going to glue my little blocks into place. Glue gun, where are you? Okay, found it. I'm getting low on glue, so I gotta grab another glue stick. Okay, now I am going to put a generous amount of glue on my block and center it the best I can and press it down firmly, letting it cool and bind in place. Awesome. Now we need to drill a hole through here so that we can fit it onto our axle. Voila! Now let's test it. Let's stick it on and see how well it moves. Okay. See what we have here? Now, if I was to hold the axle in place, there is very little wobble. So it'll wobble back and forth a little bit, and it freely spins. Next step, the counterweight. Awesome possum. So, the counterweight consists of a can full of weight, but we need to attach it to the trebuchet. So, okay, so I've got a drill bit, and I just need to make some holes. You can also use a nail with a hammer and just pound some holes in, but I like the drill bit. It makes a much cleaner, safer hole. And voila! Check it out. 4 holes. I've sanded them or filed them down to where they're safe. There, I just tied an overhead knot, and now I've got 2 little loops just like that. Okay, and finally I am going to need some way to attach these to the end here. So my option, because remember I want it to swing freely, so I am going to get a small drill bit, small enough that it'll fit a string. I don't need anything very big. And I am going to just, in the end here, drill a hole just like that. See, there's a little hole. And then what I can do is take a little bit more string. My end is frayed again. I have to even wet this one a little bit. I want to feed it through that hole and cut it so that I've got some space. Just like that. Now, what I need to do is tie. Okay, so this next part Ideally, you want your can or your counterweight to just, when it's straight down, it needs to just barely clear the base or the bottom here. You don't want it coming down and hitting the bottom because that'll lose you some energy. So you want it to be suspended slightly above the side. So, okay, so I tied my string to one end, and now I am going to feed it through just like that. Okay, next I want to attach it here so that it just barely hangs off the ground. So I find out where that point is, and then I can hold it and tie it on. Okay, so let's test it. Okay. Looking pretty good there. It's right off the ground. Now, I'm going to trim my end so it's not in the way. Now it's time to make and add the sling. So, first step, we need that little, where did I put it? There it is. That little eye hook here. And I am going to take and connect it at the top. There. So, let me put it to where you can see it. Right here, I just screwed it in to the end there. Now I need to add some string to that. So I will go through it. Make sure that it's nice and sturdy. Okay, there we go. So it's attached to this end. Now we need to make our sling. Okay, so I've got this piece of leather. Now you can use fabric or anything, and I've noticed a lot of people when they make these, they make extremely long, or not extremely long, they make really complicated slings. But you don't need complicated. You don't need like this super intricate cup. I use just like it were a slingshot. So I am going to cut a rounded end. There. Ta-da! Now, just so you know, I made mine about, this is about 3.5 inches. You can make it a little bigger, a little smaller, because where's my payload? Payload! I think the kid snuck in and baggered off with it while I wasn't looking. Oh, that's right, because it's still in here. So you want this to completely wrap around just like that. See how it'll completely envelop the payload? That is what you want. Okay, now I need to make a hole. Now you can make holes in different ways. You can, if you've got the stuff, actually make a, put rivets in here so that the leather doesn't tear, but that's not necessary. I would do that if you were launching something a lot heavier and there's going to be a lot of force on this leather. But for what we're doing here, just a simple hole will suffice. Okay, now I will I'm going to cut just a little tiny slit in here. Okay, see that little hole? I know it's like itty bitty. Now, we've got a problem, or we've got a potential problem, in that before too long, this could rip all the way out. Ideally, what you could do to prevent that from happening is if you had a leather punch or something to make a hole, right on the end, the top of the slit on both sides, you could make a little hole. Because where it's slit like this, it can easily rip. But if you've got a hole at the end at both ends of the little slit, then it's not likely to do that. So if you want to do that and you can do that, great, do it. If not, don't worry about it. You can just do this and then just replace it or repair it if it rips. So for me, for right now, let's see. I'm just going to get a length of this string. Okay, to get it through, it's easier sometimes to double the string over like this and then force it through the hole. I kind of open it up and force it through. Boom, just like that. Okay, and then I can tie it. So it's like this, easy peasy, and then I tie it. But before I tie it, I need to determine how long my sling needs to be. So here's another rule of making a trebuchet. You want your sling to be the same length as the payload arm. So from here at the fulcrum or the axis to the end is how long your sling should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch this up. I'm going to find that point where when folded, see how I folded the leather in half right here? You want that bottom of the leather to be right on the fulcrum. Okay, just like that. Now the other side. Okay, now that I have this, I've got this part, and I'm going to just cut this off. We'll figure out the length that this needs to be in a moment. We're almost done, folks. Almost done! Okay, now I need my little nail. Now, what I want to do is my nail needs to go into the end here as well, but it needs to be sticking at an angle. I've heard different people say 45 degrees that this nail should poke, so that's generally what I start at, and then you'll adjust the bend of the nail or the angle of it until you find the right part of where it launches correctly. And we'll talk about that later. Okay, so for this nail, I am going to take this thing off so that I can stick it up here. And actually, I am going to I'm going to drill a hole. That's going to be the easiest. But you want the hole as smaller than the nail of smaller than the shaft of the nail. Okay, I got my hole in the end, sticking my nail in. Okay, good, it'll fit. Now, before I do anything else, I need to chop the head off the beast. And there we have it, the nail with the head cut off, and I also took the file to kind of clean it up so it's not rough. Now we will take it, and if you've got a hammer, great, but we're going to pound that guy in a little bit. Maybe it'll be Now you'll notice it's not quite at a 45-degree angle. It's kind of shallow. Okay, so I'm going to just bend it a little bit. Okay, now it's still a little shallow for 45 degrees, but we'll use that as a starting point. Okay, oh, we're getting close, guys. Now, what I'm going to do is put some weight in here to keep it holding upright. And here's the part that's going to be difficult to see because it's off camera. But what I want is I need to make a loop in this end that will loop over the top of this pin, and it needs to be a good length so that, take my loop, go over the front. Okay, so when I set this, there. Now, it's important, let me rotate this. See how when it's in the set position, these two ends of the leather line up. You don't want it to be really offset. See how they're like really offset, looking at it like this, how one is lower than the other? Well, you want them to be so that when it's hooked up just like this and pulled tight, that it sits evenly, which it does. So I've got a good length. Now, boo! Oh, did you see that? The only thing that I have left to do is to fill the counterweight and to secure the axle. Now I have these little blocks, these little square blocks that were left over from a different project that already have holes in them, and they fit nicely on the dowel because I was using the same size of dowel. So what I would like to do is remove the dowel, and I'm going to glue this piece right on the end so that it serves as a stop. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to put a glob of glue in there. Just like that. Now I need to measure how long to make this axle. So I'm going to slip it on through. Just like that. Okay. Now I do have another block that I am going to put on here. All right. So now I've got my block. Let's stick this thing in. We'll raise this up. And here we have my second block. Okay, now that the trebuchet is all finished, you need to add some weight to this can. Now I've already added mine, but I want to go through and tell you just real quickly how you figure out how much weight to put in the can. Well, some very smart people did some research and figured out, and it's generally accepted among most professionals and engineers of the trebuchet, that your payload, remember, that's the thing you're shooting, needs to be 133 times smaller than your counterweight. So, in other words, this thing is going to be super heavy, or 133 times heavier than this. So if you wanted to make them the same weight, you'd have to collect 133 of these to equal this. Anyway, so how do I figure that out? Well, I would just get a kitchen scale or something and measure the weight of your payload, or your candy for this case. So I measured this to be 5 grams. Okay, now 5 grams is pretty small, but if you multiply that by 133, you get 665 grams. So I put this can on a scale, and I filled it with fishing weights until this whole little package weighed 665 grams. Actually, it turned out to be 666. Anyway, so that's the relationship and how you figure out how much weight to put in your counterweight. So go ahead, figure out your payload, weigh it, multiply that by 133, then fill your can with that much weight. It's done! Yay! Okay, just for fun, I'm going to shoot a piece of candy. And see how well it works. Okay, you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Whoa, that was good. I'm not going to need to do much adjusting on the pin on the top, but we'll go outside, we'll do a little bit of testing and measure distance. Because at this point, about the only thing you're going to need to adjust is the pin on the end of the payload arm. You can see that on test number 1, the pin angle is about 45 degrees. And it had a pretty shallow launch trajectory. Notice how shallow it is, indicated by the red arrow. And it only went about 24 feet. So in the test number 2, I straightened the pin angle so it's almost straight up and down, and had better results, went about 25 feet average, and the launch trajectory, like shown in the red arrow, is getting closer to 45. And finally, number 3, we nailed it. Pin angle was slightly backwards than what I usually do. The angle is not quite 45, but it's getting better. And it went about 27 feet on average, and it looked much better than the other 2. So after those tests, I found the optimum angle of the pin. Okay, now that you've got your trebuchet all done and the weight has been added to your bucket or to the little can, you're ready to shoot candy. I am so proud of you. I had such a great time, and I hope you did too. So one more tip, a little homework that I want to give you that will help increase the distance that your trebuchet can shoot. And that tip is just add wheels. So you could get on or go find some wheels. I like to use the Connects. I have some great big wheels from Connects, and I actually added them to this trebuchet, but I took them off so that we could simplify the video. But what you do is you add wheels so that it will move back and forth just like a car. Now that will increase the efficiency of your trebuchet. Well, I hope you like this video. Go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel so that you can see all the amazing things that we will be putting out. This is Isaac Ashby from Steam Thinkers. Be safe this Halloween. Toss your rotten candy with your new trebuchet and have a fun time. We'll see you later. I can't see. Like and subscribe.